organization. On the pod today, we have Sam Spurlin, who is a partner at The Ready. The Ready is an organizational change and transformation consultancy. And Sam is co-stewarding The Ready's efforts to contribute to DAOs and the Web3 space more broadly. Why does this matter? Well, there are human social structures and complex systems built around DAOs. The Ready offers a thing called the OS Canvas, which helps you work through your purpose, strategy, workflow, membership, authority in your organization, resources, how they're allocated, meetings, how do you develop mastery, how do you create structure, how do you create innovation, how does information flow, and how does compensation work? Those are all different apps in your organization's operating system. So back when I was at Gitcoin, we engaged with The Ready in order to figure out our purpose and essential intent. And I got to say that Sam is a really great person to have in the room as you're trying to figure out what you're doing. And within the space of DAOs, there are not a lot of people who can figure out how to create high functioning organizations within a DAO because it just hasn't been done before. So Sam and The Ready are kind of inventing it from first principles. I found Sam to be a really useful partner in the work that Gitcoin and then later Super Modular is doing. For me, as a software engineer, running an organization is quite different than programming computers. Leading people is way different from programming computers, and just creating common knowledge and culture and social structure and creating consent-based decision-making has all been new to me. But Sam has been a great friend and partner to me in that journey. And that's why I wanted to have him on the GreenPilled podcast, sort of have this presumption that other DAOs that are in the struggle of the bear market, that if you can spend time tuning your organization and your operating system, that's tuning your vessel that's taking you where you're going. And so a different kind of episode than I think that we've done on the GreenPilled podcast before, but a fruitful one and an important one for people who are involved in DAOs and trying to figure out their DAO operating system. So that's about all the praise that I can sing for Sam in a 2-minute bumper. You're going to have to listen to the episode in order to get a piece of his brain, and I think it's definitely worth it. So without further ado, I give you Sam Spurlin from The Ready.
Working in Web3 is awesome, but working outside of the typical W-2 employee structure is a deal breaker for so many. OPOLIS is helping the self-sovereign worker focus on what they do best: their work. Tax time is coming up. OPOLIS helps professionalize your business by helping you form an entity, generate proof of employment through pay stubs, and receive a W-2 at the end of the tax year. Are you self-employed and forced to spend money on expensive healthcare insurance with limited coverage? OPOLIS leverages group buying power through a community employment co-op, helping you save 20 to 50% on high-quality, affordable healthcare options through Cigna. And finally, OPOLIS's member owners share in OPOLIS's success and profits based on their work token holdings. You must be authorized to work inside the United States in select Canadian provinces to receive OPOLIS's benefits. Book a 30-minute free consultation with OPOLIS's experts and join OPOLIS by March 31st, 2023 to get 1,000 work and 1,000 bank tokens. Go to connect.opolis.co/bankless to get started. And if you're going to ETH Denver, make sure to stop by the OPOLIS booth or attend their Future of Work Summit hosted by OPOLIS. The Glow Dollar is a new stablecoin with a very special property. As the market cap of Glow goes up, extreme poverty goes down. Glow is a dollar-backed, non-profit stablecoin that creates basic income for people living in extreme poverty. Glow is basically the same business model as USDC, with yield-generating treasuries on one side and a stablecoin on Ethereum on the other. But instead of being a for-profit company, Glow is a non-profit that donates 100% of all yields from the Glow Reserve to Give Directly's basic income program. Give Directly is a charity that gives people money, no strings attached, to people living in poverty, and is a charity that Vitalik has previously donated to and supported in the past. With Glow, you can reduce poverty just by holding a stablecoin. Glow is launching in early 2023, and you can join the waitlist at glowdollar.org/greenpill. That's glodollar.org/greenpill.
What's up, Sam? How you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you today?
Pretty good, thanks. Excited to chat about DAO organization and DAO operating systems with you. So maybe you could tee us off by telling us a little bit about The Ready.
I would be happy to. I'm pausing here and gathering my thoughts because the Ready is always evolving, kind of how we talk about ourselves and the work that we do. So I always feel like there's like a slightly different angle that I'm bringing to it. I feel like 7 years in, I should really have my answer dialed, but every time it feels like it's totally new. So what the Ready is, at least originally conceptualized, was and is an organizational transformation consultancy. And 7 years ago, when we kicked this off, DAOs obviously were not on our radar, and our clients were generally really large, often kind of Fortune 500 sorts of organizations who were feeling like they were kind of getting crushed under their own bureaucracy, and we wanted to help them find better ways of organizing, better ways of working. And that's what we did for and have and continue to do for a while now. And only in the past year or so, actually a little over a year at this point, did we decide that as a kind of future of work consultancy, we should really make sure we have a foot in the future of organizations, and realize that we would be doing ourselves a disservice and our especially our future selves a disservice if we did not get into DAOs in a major way and really try to understand what's going on there. And that's what has been a decent part of my portfolio over the past year, is kind of leading our efforts as it regards DAOs.
Did you just say that DAOs are the future of organization?
I mean, they could be. They're not yet, maybe, but
Yeah.
we're definitely throwing down that bet that DAOs, or whatever they're called 5-10 years from now, are going to be a major player in kind of how we're thinking about work and how this work gets done. So yeah, we're trying to figure that out and make sure that we're around and relevant, and maybe even more than that, like actually help steer things in a better direction.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a fun prompt, like, are DAOs the future of organizations? Because it's such a wide aperture that I feel like it's almost meaningless. Like, saying DAOs are the future of organizations is like saying like buildings are the future of housing. Like, okay, are we talking about schools, museums, airports, houses, apartment buildings? Like, there's so many different subtypes of DAO, and like the DAO moniker is just this like catch-all. This aperture is almost, in my opinion, too wide to even be useful.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And even kind of on the other end of that too, like, well, what is even work going to, like, what does work mean in the future as well too? So both sides of the phrase are pretty can get vague pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious what you think the future of organizing would be, and how does it differ from maybe companies as they would have existed before Web3? Maybe that's a good place to start. Is just where are y'all excited?
Yeah. So I think maybe the way to kind of tackle this is like what got us interested in this in the first place. I mean, the Ready, from the beginning, we have been very interested in kind of like alternative ways of organizing. So we were not trying to fashion ourselves after the consulting companies that everybody knows and that sort of work. We were really inspired by things like holacracy and sociocracy and reinventing organizations, Frederick Laloux's work. Basically, this whole body of thinking about can we come together as humans and organizations in a different way. So that's like our ancestry, and in terms of like how we think about this work. So then if you care about what does it look like to decentralize organizations? What does it look like to push autonomy out? What does it look like to have self-managing organizations? And then you become aware of this thing happening over in this weird crypto world called decentralized autonomous organizations. Like, you're hitting some major keywords that we cared and care about at the Ready. So like that was just kind of the very beginning of us being like, oh shit, like we should probably like figure this out, because these are the types of things that we care about. So when I think about what, and it's relevant to the work we do with our regular organizations, our legacy clients as well. Like when we think about the future of work, we think about organizations that are not these top-down hierarchies of command and control. They're much more like networks and self-managing in places. And there's a certain amount of reality or pragmatism that we have to bring to our traditional work. Our Fortune 100 company, our client, we're not going to turn into a self-managing organization, but we can bring principles that are relevant, people positivity, complexity consciousness, that I think are kind of more natural in DAOs to these other sorts of organizations. So all of that is just to say that there's so much opportunity within DAOs to really fundamentally rethink what it means to be an organization and how to get work done, that we were just naturally drawn to it. So the last year has really been about learning as much as possible, getting up to speed, seeing where we had something to offer, seeing where we could learn from DAOs. And that's kind of been my own personal journey in this space over the last year.
Yeah. Well, I guess, maybe one way to talk about it, I think we're kind of circling it right now, but maybe talking at the object level about the kind of work that y'all do would be a good thing to do next. So what's the Ready's operating system canvas, and how does it help you sort of illuminate these design criteria in the DAOs that you work with?
Yeah, so the operating system canvas is just a tool we developed using the metaphor of an operating system for an organization. So if you think about what a organization's operating system might consist of, it's things like purpose, strategy, workflow, membership, the other things that are in the canvas there, which you can think of each of these spaces, each of these areas as having practices and assumptions and principles about how we do this thing within the organization. And the way that you would fill out the canvas is basically the way people experience your organization. So I can give you a blank canvas and you could be an employee at the most top-down, horrible organization in the world. You could fill out the canvas that would kind of describe your OS. I could give a canvas to a DAO, really high functioning DAO. They could fill out kind of how do we do these things? What do we believe about these things? So our work is really helping organizations make visible what is usually invisible, which is how the operating system manifests in what it feels like to work there, and then make decisions and experiments around how can we do the things that are currently holding us back? How can we try them and do things differently? What can we do to actually make meetings or authority or purpose better in our organization? So that's the basic idea behind the work. And then obviously the work looks very different, whether you're focusing in on meetings or whether you're focusing in on purpose. The work, manifests differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess these maybe like a naive, like straw man reaction to what you just said, Sam, is like, wait, DAOs, I thought we're talking about autonomous organizations, and the things that you're talking about in the operating system canvas, purpose, strategy, workflow, membership, resources, authority, those are all like human organization things. So I think that one of the things that I want to sort of disambiguate here is that there's going to be a lot of organizations that are partially autonomous and that they run on trustware. And then there's also going to be ones that run on socialware. And it feels like you're helping to like bridge that gap of working in a like reinventing organizations teal way for the humans that are augmenting the code in the organizations. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I think we can maybe even take it a step further. I bet you, and I'm literally kind of thinking this, for the first time right now. I bet you there are DAOs where parts of the OS are locked in to, the protocol, or locked into the software running the DAO. Maybe, purpose or resource allocation is the obvious one there. But if you're even in these examples, if you're ever going to have humans kind of coming together and having to talk to each other or do anything to decide how to set something up or set initial parameters, I think, there is room for this OS concept for all organizations.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know, how does that hit you? I'm curious. I think that's not as straw manny as maybe you made it feel. So I'm curious.
Oh, I'm just well, if I had started an organization that run a little bit more on code and from the start. I think that some of our builders out there are really smart enough to be building decentralized organizations from the start. I'm not that smart. I built Gitcoin centralized back in 2017. So there was a lot of social ware to manage as Gitcoin started its evolution from a company to a DAO. And actually, we're recording this week. The alpha protocols are actually going live. So tap TM.
Yep.
And so, I think that that's totally fair, but I just wanted to speak to the members of the audience that maybe don't see things totally that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, and so what are the most common misalignments that you see, and through this process, how do those get resolved?
Yeah, so I think over the last year, kind of bringing some of these ideas to various DAOs and doing some of this work, the areas of the OS canvas that I have seen, or where we've done the most work, have been around purpose and strategy. And then I think the workflow meetings information column are often a place where there's some low hanging fruit to start, even just like capturing some like how we're doing things right now and making it more visible, which I think has been valuable. In a DAO context where perhaps people are joining permissionlessly or close to permissionlessly and trying to get the lay of the land as quickly as possible. There's often a lot there, but the purpose and strategy stuff I think is often a interesting place to do some work because, I mean, as you can imagine, if you don't have a great sense of like why we're here or what we're actually trying to do, it can be difficult to make other decisions. You need to be able to anchor it in something. And that's not to say that purpose can't change or evolve over time. But if you're making decisions about scarce resources and don't have a good sense of what even is good for us, then it's hard to do that. So it's kind of an anchoring, kind of foundational bit of work for a lot of organizations, DAOs included, I think.
Yeah. I think that, like, as someone who's tried to work in, or who's worked in Web 2 startups and in Web 3 startups, and using startups in like a broad encompassing way, just organizations in general, it feels like there's a lot of hierarchy that's trained into us. You kind of have two camps of people in Web3. There's people who came from the corporate world and they're trying to unlearn that way of thinking. Yeah. And then you've got people who came out of academia, which have a whole bunch of other things to unlearn, but they don't have like the corporate stuff to unlearn in them.
They don't have corporate hierarchy, but there's an insane amount of hierarchy in academia though, too.
Yeah, I think that's true. And so it's like unlearning the old world and then also learning the new world. But it also feels a little bit like we're building a muscle here. Like we have to figure out purpose and strategy and workflow, like running a 5K, and then we can go into running a half marathon and then a marathon, and then we can be ultra marathoners of decentralized working. But what are the things that you think people need to unlearn in order to be able to build those muscles?
I mean, I think one, you just kind of pointed to the temptation to take huge leaps or think that only huge leaps are worthwhile. I think it's really challenging for creative, intelligent people to not fall into that anti-pattern of thinking like, all right, well, I can picture how, like, I can see where we are right now and I can see where I want us to be and I can picture it, I can imagine it, I can almost feel it. So why can't we just go from here to there? And that's like the same thing as basically deciding I have never run a mile in my life, but I really want to do an ultra marathon. So I'm just going to get out there tomorrow and do it. So like that isn't a bit of an unlearning, kind of some humility that you have to really kind of bake into yourself to be okay with the idea that the only way organizations, truly complex organizations, change is by the continual iterative effort to change them. And it is frustrating sometimes because the size of the bite you have to take in order to metabolize that change is sometimes very small. And where people kind of fall off the path is that if they just take that one small bite and then never go back for the next one and the next one and the next one. So I really love the metaphor of building a muscle. We often use that with clients because that's exactly what you're doing. You have to build some self-efficacy in the idea that you actually can do this, and you have to show yourself that taking small action continuously will get you to where you want to go. And our role often is kind of that role of the trainer, right? Like the trainer can like help you get to the gym and show you what to do, but if your trainer lifts the weights for you, you're not getting any fitter. If the trainer does the run for you, you're not getting any fitter. So I think sometimes that's the role that we play, is to try to help, bring that bravery, that courage to organizations to actually give a shit about how they function and take action towards making it a little bit better continuously.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if we can maybe talk through the work that you did with Gitcoin, because you and I are on different sides of the table when Gitcoin was going from company to DAO. And, before we go down that series of events, I just want to say I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin as of, I think it was July of 2022. And Gitcoin is now a DAO without a CEO. And I think like part of me disaffiliating was like unlearning that hierarchy as an organization. And I also, when I disaffiliated from Gitcoin, wanted to send a message that like the way we operate in this organization, the graceful thing to do is to let go of power and to hire people under you and have them do a better job than you could ever do, and to gracefully exit. Because in a lot of the organizations that I've seen in the past, there's been too much clinging of power. But anyway, like that's all just to say that like as I go down these questions and ask, I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin, so I'm now on the outside. But you and I had this shared experience of doing operating system and purpose stuff at Gitcoin. So maybe we can kind of pull that thread. I think it was around this time last year that Gitcoin engaged you and said, "Hey, we're trying to figure out how to organize as a DAO." And you came in and you took us through this OS canvas. So maybe we could talk through that a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm. This is where my terrible memory is going to foil this conversation in places. So if I remember something incorrectly and you remember it differently, please steer me down the right path. But so the way this work often starts is simply, as you said, kind of like let's put the OS canvas in front of us and let's just talk about reality right now. And our terminology is like, let's map the tensions. What are the tensions we're feeling in the operating system right now? And what is that telling us about where we should potentially put our attention? So I don't have that original OS canvas in front of me, but I'm assuming, given the work that we ended up doing, some of the tensions that emerged, and from what I remember, was around the budgeting process. Like, how do we make decisions about how we spend our money? And then if you follow that trail back, not even particularly far, you get to the question of purpose and strategy. So you then think, oh, well, if we only have X amount of resources and we have to decide among all of these things, then what are we grounding these decisions in? So the decision was, let's do some work on purpose. Let's do some work on strategy, and that will help any other sort of decisions related to our operating system that we'll need to make. Does that track with kind of your memory of how we set up our initial sort of work together?
Yeah. Oh man, maybe I shouldn't have started this line of questioning, since we both have hazy memories and don't have the document in front of each other. But yes,
I'm sure people will tell us if we're wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully not angrily on Twitter, but
No.
we will. So I mean, I think that basically, I mean, like, and let's first acknowledge what we're trying to do here. We're trying to turn a company into a DAO, or at least one product suite of a company into a DAO, and those are two really different ways of working, not only from like a financial and governance perspective, but like the product needs to be rewritten soup to nuts. And so there's a lot of work to do. And there's not a question. And there's kind of like the first thing is like, well, who's in charge of driving what? Now that like we don't have orders from the CEO on high to do these things. And so there's a little bit of nuance there. But I do think that like starting with, I just remember the difference in like, the company had a mission of build and fund public goods, which like I ratified from on high as the CEO of the company. But then we did this like purpose exercise, and the purpose and essential intents coming out of Gitcoin were sort of derived from the collective intelligence and the governance mechanism of Gitcoin. And I think that there was like a stepwise improvement and engagement and sense of ownership from team members, from DAO contributors, that they actually had a hand in ratifying that. So that was a really eye-opening moment for me of like, oh, giving up control means like, it's like this stepwise dance with the contributors where they're going to take more ownership. I'm using ownership in like the emotional sense.
Sure.
And I'm going to let go, and we're going to kind of like do it together. So I thought that was really interesting, and it was really a breath of fresh air that the purpose was something that we collectively ratified.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's, part of the power of something like a DAO is that, when you start to get more voices into everything, I mean, obviously the downsides of that are easy to point to in terms of like, if everybody has to vote on everything, then nothing ever happens. Like that is already a well-trod path. But in terms of the unexpected things that can emerge when you just have more voices in it, I think that's what you're pointing to with the purpose. Like ideally, one of the benefits of the DAO is just that we get better stuff because of just the cognitive diversity of what is coming up. And then it's up to the operating system of the DAO to be able to have the processes in place to actually do something with all that raw material, which is what I tried to kind of work us through to the purpose and essential intent that we got to.
Mm-hmm.
So that essential intent was a phrase that you just dropped that people may not be familiar with. So I'll just share a couple of words on that if that's helpful.
Yeah, do it.
So the idea of essential intent for an organization is, if you think about something like the purpose, which is it should be like call it a 100-year purpose. We're not generally revisiting that particularly often, and it's something that will take a long time to actually, if ever, manifest. So that's inspirational, but not particularly concrete, maybe not super useful for kind of any sort of day-to-day or shorter-term decisions. And then if you think about the other end of the continuum, something like an outcome or a goal or an objective, if you do OKRs, anything like that, those tend to be hyper tactical, quite short term. They give you a lot of clarity about what to go do, but they're not particularly inspirational. So is it useful to articulate kind of that middle layer between purpose and between purpose and objectives that is both inspirational and concrete, and getting an organization to talk about what are those bets that we're placing, that most important work, those most important outcomes that we need to make happen in that kind of 2 to 4 year range. If the conversation that you have around that is incredibly valuable for clarifying what are we going to go do, and more importantly, what are we not going to do. And, if your essential intent is 10 essential intent long, if you have 10 different statements, I'm questioning whether or not essential is actually means anything in that case. So if you can have just a couple of phrases, a couple of statements of this is our most important work, it's going to take us, a couple of years, 2 to 4 years to actually make happen. Establishing those, arguing about those, fighting those, and then consenting to that list. Now you have something that's in between your purpose and your really short term, where you can start to get alignment around what are we going to go do? What are we not going to do? What are we going to fund? What are we not going to fund? How are we going to organize around this? And I found it to be, useful for organizations and particularly for DAOs.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that we found it to be so useful. So after the split of the DAO split off into its own thing, there's this company called Super Modular, which used to be called Gitcoin Holdings, but the Gitcoin name has been transferred to the DAO, of course. So now it's called Super Modular, and we were doing our charter. We actually used purpose and essential intents. Nice. So you kind of like, you didn't just fish for us, you taught us to fish.
taught you to fish. I love to hear it.
Yeah, and so what we landed.
Was it a similar experience for you? Like, what was it like, getting, kind of a new crew together around a new purpose or a new mission and trying to articulate that? Like, what was that experience like?
Well, it wasn't a new crew because
right, you're right.
So basically,
as I was saying that, I realized that they weren't new. But
new
in context, I guess.
Yeah. New in that like everything was just called Gitcoin before, like it was Gitcoin kernel and hackathons and grants, and we had this thing called Kudos and like an ad network, and like now we're modularizing the whole thing, right? So it's like a new module. And the crew that I inherited was the hackathon business. So a lot of people don't know this, but Gitcoin was actually like Gitcoin grants was the thing that people loved the public goods for, but hackathons is how we kept we paid the bills, is by running virtual hackathons with people. And, of course, I meet people at Ethereum events, and they either give me kudos for opening up a space in their career by hosting a hackathon, or because Gitcoin grants got them through a rough period with their project or whatever. And so, they're kind of like equal parts of the beast that was Gitcoin. And so we inherited the hackathon business. And so the team had known each other and been working with together for like 2 years. It's just the first time they'd been invited to come up with their own purpose that was independent of the brand and the chimera that was Gitcoin. And so I thought it went really well. Of course, it would have been different. I am the CEO and like founder of Supermodular, and so I'd be curious if an outside facilitator had done it versus like me had doing it. But the purpose we landed on was cultivating a more regenerative digital frontier. And this podcast is part of that, right? We're talking about regenerative crypto economics on this podcast. And so it was just kind of, it was nice to define a purpose and to just have like a small module that we were doing it for. And so I have positive memories of it. And anyone who's working in a DAO that feels somewhat aimless, I would encourage them to do this exercise as well.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to hear that. And, just to talk a little bit more about this idea of essential intent, because I don't want anyone to leave with the idea that, all right, well, you just do this, you do this one workshop or whatever, and you write these things down and you're good forever. No, essential intent are designed such that it's part of an iterative strategy process. So when I teach organizations how to do essential intent or do any sort of purpose work, I try to embed that in at least like roughly a quarterly cadence of coming back and looking at those essential intent and asking ourselves, what have we learned that has either validated or invalidated any of these essential intent? Should we tweak any of them? Ideally, you get to the point where you can say like, hey, actually, we did this essential intent. Like, let's retire this one. Like, let's give it a little send off and let's do something. And let's figure out like what the next thing is. So the essential intent are meant to give you structure for continually coming back to your strategy and making sure that you're always on that right path, because the world around, us is changing really rapidly. And at least coming together quarterly to look at this stuff lets us have a container to have the conversations that we need to have around prioritization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I'm wondering if you could kind of sort of paint us a picture of like how it started and how it's going for some of the DAOs that you've worked with. Like, did you come into DAOs and they were tyranny of the structurelessness or totally hierarchical, and then they become less orange and they become more teal? They seem to be more on the rails. Like what are some signs of an organization that's on track with building its DAO operating system versus not on track?
Yeah, there's so much and so many paths I could take that question. So this is going to be a little disorganized. So help bring me back when I wander too far.
Right.
But the first thing that I remember thinking when I was first getting into the space, over a year ago at this point, the first I honestly don't remember what DAO it was, because I was just joining and joining Discords left and right, trying to wrap my mind around like what is actually going on here. And I finally got on a call for some DAO, where they're ostensibly going to be talking about some work that they were doing together. So I finally got on a call, and like 20 minutes into this call, I was having this feeling of incredible nostalgia, because it felt exactly like most of my regular clients' meetings, in the sense that someone had maybe put together a couple of thoughts about what the agenda was, and we were kind of sticking to it, but not really. We got a little bit sidetracked and spent like 20 minutes maybe talking about something that didn't seem particularly relevant. So I had this moment of like, oh, this feels familiar, which means I maybe have something to offer here, because I think, and that's not probably true for all DAOs, but I would imagine some listeners right now have experienced meetings that didn't seem particularly structured for the moment, that maybe they don't really have different structures for different types of meetings. Meetings that have different purposes all seem to have the same sort of structure, that sort of thing. So I guess early on, I remember thinking like, oh, okay, we maybe have something to offer here. Because I wasn't sure, coming in, not knowing anything, and knowing that the Ready is good at helping organizations kind of change how they do things. So that was a breath of fresh air at first, which is kind of messed up to say that I was glad that this meeting was bad. But it just meant we had stuff to do there.
It was familiar.
Yeah, it was familiar, which is familiar in that, and also in the sense that like I have helped organizations get their meetings right. Like there are some like pretty set moves that can help organizations like not experience that anymore. It's not hard. It's simple but not easy, I guess is the best way to say it. Doing things with default operating rhythm and having certain types of meetings on certain types of cadences to hold the right conversations that we need to have. Like it's knowable work, at least I would say it that way. The other thing, though, that I was experiencing, and this is at the kind of the complete flip side of what I just said there about it feeling very familiar, is kind of that structure, that tyranny of structurelessness, that kind of chaos that can, at least at that time, really describe what was going on in these DAOs. I think it's useful to think about a continuum with, on one end is pure bureaucracy, and on the other end is pure chaos. And my career up until last year was really playing on the bureaucracy end of the continuum. And even some of the most progressive kind of traditional organizations are still like past the halfway point probably on bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And we can help them kind of move a little bit more towards that self-managing, self-organizing side, but it's still very much bureaucracy. DAOs were like completely on the other end. Like mm-hmm. just nothing was bolted down. Everything was up for debate. Everything there was no structure, which in some ways is overwhelming. And what I eventually left with, and what I continue to feel, is that is huge opportunity. In most organizations, in legacy organizations, there's very little degrees of freedom. Like we have to scratch and claw for the ability to do anything differently. And it's a battle. And at the end of the day, you've maybe just moved a couple of steps down that continuum. In DAOs, I think because there's so much degrees of freedom, it can feel like, well, where do we even start? It's so overwhelming. But the opportunity of like what you can bring to that space is, for people who care about making organizations more autonomous, more self-managing, is just really, really exciting. So I think the main thing, and I think this will actually finally answer your question, and we'll see here in a second. The main thing I look for an organization, whether it's a DAO or a legacy organization, to know whether or not they are on the right path is, do they have any sort of cadence around disciplined experimentation? So are they actually articulating experiments that they're trying within their organization, or is it just pure chaos? And then part of that disciplined experimentation is actually extracting what we have learned from those experiments and either kicking off new experiments or bringing that same idea to other parts of the organization and creating this rhythm, this heartbeat of experimentation that is actually being internalized back into the organization and not just spinning in chaos all the time. And that looks like lots of different things, whether you have a routine, a ritual of retrospection, whether you have ways that teams can share what they are learning about best ways of working, whether that sort of thing is gains you reputation in a space or honored things like that is where my head goes when I think about what a good OS looks like for a DAO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of little milestones or signs that you're either on the happy path or wallowing into the abyss, or there's probably a lot of different trajectories there, and you probably get to see a lot of it because you see so many different organizations.
Yeah, for sure. And because basically the path looks very different for each organization, for each DAO. I mean, if you think about putting a canvas of 12 fields in front of any sort of organization, especially one that has been functioning okay for a while, like different things are going to pop up in terms of where we should do some work. I mean, a pattern that I've already kind of mentioned is that purpose and strategy is often a place that starts. But I think it's been really interesting. A lot of our clients, we don't ever really do anything with mastery or compensation or really even membership, because membership in a traditional organization is pretty clear. Like, here's the hiring process. Here's how you get hired. Like, maybe there's some onboarding stuff there that we can do to make it better, but it's really clear. But like, membership is a very interesting concept in a lot of DAOs. Like, what does it mean to be in versus out? Or like, when you're in, what does that actually get you? Or are there different levels of in? And like, I don't know, there's like juicy, interesting things there. Same thing with compensation, as well. Obviously, that's a a whole conversation that's ongoing in this space. So I appreciate the fact that the work that we do with DAOs allows me to explore other parts of the canvas that I don't necessarily get to touch in my regular day-to-day work.
Right. So we'll have a link to the operating system canvas in the show notes so that people can check it out. Um, I'm curious. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about consent-based agreement as a mechanism for
Mm.
evolving organizations. Why consent-based agreement? Why is that such an important mechanism?
Yeah, so when we talk about making decisions in organizations, you can kind of think of it as consensus-based decision making, which is kind of the default in most organizations. Like we all,
Mhm.
before we make this decision, we all need to agree this is the best way forward, and we're gonna, lock ourselves in this room until we can make this decision. But there are other levels of agreement that you can get to make a decision, and one of those is consent. So you can think of consent as if we all have kind of a what we need, basically the line that we're trying to get to is not that we all think this is the best course of action, because that can be a pretty high line to get to, a very narrow overlap that we have to reach as a team. What we're trying to get to is an agreement that this path forward is safe to try. And if you can agree on the fact that this proposal, whatever it is that we're considering, is safe to try, then we can actually go and use it in the real world and get some real data about whether or not it was the right decision, and we can always come back and change it over time. So bringing that idea of consent to the agreements that we have with each other in our organization has been really huge for how we work at the Ready and how we think about kind of really progressive organizations. And agreements, by agreement, I mean basically anything that you would potentially fight over, fight with a colleague about. So, the way that we define the roles in our organization could be an agreement. An agreement could be, the process that we use to do a certain thing, a policy that we have about how we spend a shared resource, things like that. So, if you can move an organization in the direction of like noticing that there are agreements that we should probably codify, and then we can use a consent-based agreement kind of algorithm to align on these agreements and then do our best to actually live into these agreements. And I think this is where there's some interesting things that DAOs may have in their toolbox that traditional organizations don't, which we can talk more about. That's the basic idea around it. And so what the Ready did a few years ago is we figured out. I mean, so the way we've helped organizations do this is it's very high touch. Using something called integrative decision making. It's this way of considering a proposal with a team and getting questions and incorporating reactions. Very high touch, very time consuming. Is there a way to bake that into software so that teams can do that for themselves and do it in an asynchronous way, which became even more important, over COVID, where at least where a lot of our traditional clients pre-DAO work were having to wrestle with working remotely for the first time. So we spun out a company called Murmur, which is building a product to do that. And we're the biggest customer of Murmur for running the Ready itself. So we have all of the agreements, over 100 of them that kind of dictate how the Ready works. And we really believe that if you are subject to an agreement at the Ready, you have the opportunity to consent or not to that agreement. So that's the basic kind of theory or idea behind consent-based agreement making for articulating the operating system of an organization.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, a couple things there that I just want to say back to you. So it feels like 100% consensus is too high of a bar for most organizations about directions that are going to be taken. And so in these governing bodies of DAOs, having consent-based decision making just means that like if something is safe enough to try, then that's the bar that things clear, which creates a permissive culture of innovation. And so that's why consent-based decision making is so important to you. And then the second thing I heard was that murmur.com is a way of building a product around the work that you do at the Ready in order to do DAO organization work, and Murmur kind of bakes in some of this consent-based decision making into its product.
Yeah, basically Murmur will walk you through how to make a consent-based decision. If you give it a proposal, it'll and who needs to consent to the proposal, it'll kind of own the process of like, right now we're just asking clarifying questions, and now that round ends and the proposer answers the questions, and then now we're just doing reactions and people are leaving advice on the proposal about how to make it better, and then that round ends and the proposer is answering or incorporating those reactions, and now it's checking for objections, and if there are no objections, then the proposal has passed, and if there is an objection, then the objector and the proposer are working together to integrate that objection, and that's all living within the software, so that you don't need a facilitator, you don't need to sit in a room for an hour. You can let this process kind of run over the course of a week. Start a week on Monday with a kind of ill thought through proposal, and by the end of the week have a really tight consent based decision that has been made by the people who needed to consent to it.
I'm sure your customers love you for making the number of meetings slightly less in their organizations.
Ideally, hopefully we're not just like recreating like there's always an element of like, oh, there's a new tool in my kind of tool set that I have to get used to, or I have to build in what is my rhythm for like checking to see whether there is an agreement that I need to ask questions about or react to. So there are new habits to develop, but I think they are smaller muscle movements than kind of sitting around in a meeting or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll see. I mean, they're building. I mean, so they're not the Ready does not own them. They're their own entity at this point. We are just their biggest customer and kind of evangelist out in the world. So I'm always happy. If someone is curious about Murmur, I and my colleagues at the Ready are great people to talk to about it. But I think at the same time, Murmur is continuing to figure this out too. Like, how do you bring this idea that an organization should take the time and effort, because it does take time and effort to actually capture these agreements that normally just kind of float in the ether, pun intended, I guess. They're just implicit, and doing that extra work of actually making the implicit explicit, I think, is really powerful, but it's not necessarily obvious to folks until they've kind of lived under it for a little while. So it's been an interesting challenge to kind of like help bring people along far enough that they get to start to actually feel the benefits, and it doesn't just feel like a bunch of extra work.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, like if you take us forward 10 or 15 years in a world in which the Ready and your work is maximally successful, what does that world look like?
Gosh, I don't know if I can like think big enough. I'm always so like focused in on kind of like, all right, the day to day, like how am I going to get this organization a little bit better, bit better? I mean, I think the world of work becomes fundamentally different, which is almost so obvious as to not be useful to say. I mean, we talk about two primary principles that we try to bring to organizations. So people positivity and complexity consciousness. So I think to answer that question, I would just have to take each of those and like really get to the heart of what we're talking about there. So with people positivity, if the Ready is massively successful, nobody should be going to a job or feeling like they have to work in an organization where their dignity as a human being is not honored and celebrated, which I think is like pretty like, those are big words and big aspirations. So I'm trying to like lean into your question here, but like I've experienced for myself, and I've people that I love who have spent the majority of their lives going to shitty jobs that for whatever reason, they could not do something else for lots of good reasons. And it was just their reality. And I can't think of many things that are more depressing than that. Basically signing yourself up for a lifetime of kind of slogging away at an organization that doesn't recognize your dignity as a human being. And I think the work that we try to bring to these organizations, the one angle on it is the organizations that we work with as the Ready, they should be better places for human beings by the time we're gone. And sometimes that's only a little bit of a move, and hopefully it can be a major move. And if we're massively successful in 15 to 20 years, maybe we fundamentally changed that. So most people feel like, maybe work will never be something that people actually, want to do all the time or anything like that. But just, I hope that there are far fewer people that feel like they are in soul-sucking work conditions. And then on the complexity conscious side of things, I think more about how what that means is basically organizations really understanding the fact that they are complex systems, and that complex system just fundamentally cannot be predicted and kind of planned and controlled the way a complicated system is. And so much of the bureaucracy in our legacy clients, at least, is the remnant of believing that they were simply complicated systems, that if we got enough smart people together and we put them in a room, they could design the optimal, perfect system, and it will always function well. So I think the flip side of that, the complexity consciousness, is what does it look like for an organization that is really responsive and adaptive and able to react to what is happening in their environment in the appropriate way? And that's, there's so many different kind of things there. And I think it's that one's a little bit less clear for me than the people positivity one, but there would not be any more of this bureaucratic theater. It wouldn't be, people would feel like they would be actually using their time on the most important work when they're working within organizations. And I think that's relevant to DAOs too. There are plenty of people who I've talked to who spend all of their time working for DAOs, and they don't necessarily feel like they're always using their time on the most important things. There's lots of administrative stuff that can get spun up if in a DAO. And I would hope that that stuff goes away in that kind of maximally successful 15, 20, 100-year sort of situation.
Amazing. Well, we've got a few minutes left. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to say?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so. I feel like I rambled enough. If people want to know more, I'm on Twitter. At least right now I am. I mean, we'll see what continues to happen in the world of Twitter. Well, maybe that doesn't age well, but right now I am. I continue. The Ready continues to invest in letting me kind of like hang out in DAO land and not have to worry too much about bringing in revenue to the Ready. So like, if you're curious at all about anything, like, you're not signing yourself up for some sort of weird and aggressive sales push. Like, I just like talking to people, and I want to learn from more people who are thinking about org design stuff within DAOs, especially folks who have been in this space longer than I have. And I know there are lots of you out there. I follow a lot of you on Twitter. I try to interact with you, but I would love to just have more conversations with people who are thinking about things like an operating system or org design within this new construct that we all love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Well, that's a good segue into people finding you and maybe engaging with you in the Ready. So where do people find you in the Ready online?
Yeah, so the Ready is just theready.com. I have a website at samspurlin.com or just Sam Spurlin on Twitter. That's probably the main places. Shoot me an email if you want, sam@theready.com. You can. It doesn't take much to find me online.
Great. Well, I think that we found you at a time in which Gitcoin was reinventing itself, and you were a really useful relationship for us. And so I hope to pay it forward, in that tens or maybe even hundreds of listeners can start to listen to your thoughts and help organize their DAOs and their communities in a way that is much more functional. So appreciate everything you've done, Sam.
And likewise, right back at you. I appreciate kind of the leap of faith I think that you kind of showed us, letting us come in and do some of this work with all of you. I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah, I think that we learned a lot. So it was a fruitful engagement. All right, Sam. Well, thanks so much for joining.
Cool. Thanks for having me.